welcome to Jade Kind Gaming. My name is Adam. Today I am going to do a flip through and review of the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition Dungeon Master's Guide. The past couple of weeks I've done one both for the Player's Handbook and for the Monster Manual. And this is of course completing the trilogy of core rulebooks for Dungeons & Dragons. Again, a book I do very much love. I'm not sure between this and the Player's Handbook. The Player's Handbook, of course, provides the main rules, so it's certainly the most necessary, but just some of the stuff in here is beautiful. I didn't read through all of it page per page yet, but I've looked through a lot of it pretty thoroughly. Plenty to talk about and go over. So, why don't we just get right into it? Of course, we have our art here on the cover. Dungeon Master's Guide. Everything a Dungeon Master needs to weave legendary stories for the world's greatest role-playing game. Table of contents. Begins with an introduction as to just what a Dungeon Master is. If you're watching this, hopefully you know it's the person that runs the game for the players. Anyways, part 1 is Master of Worlds. Like the Player's Handbook, this is divided into 3 parts with chapters within each part. Starting with a world of your own. And it goes over basically like the assumptions that it makes, and then the idea of breaking them. And one thing, one of the first things that goes through here is the pantheon, the deities that your world uses, giving an example and just sort of going over how to create your own pantheon. In the campaign I'm already running, I've already done that, and they give some pretty simple guidelines, make it decently fun to do. And that is one thing, just creating a religion, or in my case I did a pair of contrasting religions, and they sort of go over that. Dualism, monotheism, animism, different, forces and philosophies. They go over different types of, that you could make the religion to make it seem a bit different than what is just normally considered. They have the idea, the whole mapping your campaign. They have different scales that essentially scale down to how detailed an area needs to be mapped out, as well as information for settlements, towns, cities, villages, just basic information to help make those city visits much easier to run, much easier to build your own city. Different governments, different currencies, languages, just guidelines and suggestions for helping to really craft a world of your own, which is one of the things that I love most about being the game master, or dungeon master in this case, but is that creating a world. They give this section on factions and organizations, where they go over like renown within it and ranking. And something that I hadn't really considered until I read this part, and it actually really affected, one of the big parts of the campaign that I've recently started to run. So that was, that's something that was useful for me. Let's see, they go, creating a campaign, big sort of world-shaking events that you might have a couple of to really, either start the campaign off or signify its closing. And they give different types, and then they have, like rise or fall of a leader or an era, cataclysmic disaster, an invasion, prophecy, etc. And then they go into examples of what those might be. Different discoveries people might have, or, extinctions that could happen. And they sort of help guide you creating that event for your world. They go over tracking time, and creating your own calendar, an example calendar, something I may end up doing for my world. Different levels of play, powers at different player levels. Different types of fantasy. Oh, this is one of the things I like. They have these, essentially if you're, wuxia is what they call it, but essentially it's that Asian sort of campaign, that martial artist sort of feel for a campaign. They give the idea of, if you're running a campaign like that, they have the weapons that are in the game and just other names for them. So like, I know in previous editions the shuriken was a weapon. Well, now it's just a dart could be called a shuriken. Exact same stats, but it's just a cultural difference. Obviously, it wouldn't look like a dart anymore. But it would be statistically the same, so that's good enough. And just that ability to quickly change things over to a different feel by changing the names. And then Chapter 2 is creating a multiverse, which goes over the planes and what planes you're going to need. And it has here putting the planes together. And essentially, they have their own multiverse, their own cosmology in here, which is also gone over near the end of the player's handbook. But they essentially have this little block of here's what our planes are used for in our game, and really, if you can make those considerations, you can make your own multiverse. Anyway, so they go through, and they go through planar travel, and they go into their different planes. Their major planes, then the inner planes, like the elemental planes. They have this wonderful map. I love this map of the inner planes and of the elemental planes and how they join. Beautiful. Then of course the outer planes, and I think, let's see, there was one, and pretty much all of the outer planes and a lot of the other planes have at least one optional rule. And Yizgard's was one I figured I'd read as an example. It is the home of slain heroes who wage eternal battle on the fields of glory. Any creature other than a constructor undead that is killed by an attack or a spell while on Yizgard is restored to life at dawn the next day, with all hit points restored, all conditions and afflictions it suffered before its death are removed. Get back up, keep fighting. It's just a feel, and they have different ones for all the different planes. Sigil, the city of doors, I believe is what it's called. Anyways, yeah, they have Sigil. And then we get to part 2, which is Master of Adventures. And that is creating the actual campaign, basically. Creating adventures, goals for the adventure in a dungeon or in the wilderness or elsewhere, climax creation, creating villains, framing the events with special things, creating encounters, and then they actually, within here is actually the creating the counters mechanically for experience, how powerful the fight should be when you're building it, for how challenging it'll end up being. And one of the things they don't actually mention in here, or at least if they did, I didn't see where, was whether or not when you're actually awarding the experience, you divide it or give it all to every player. You divide it. Just mechanically, it's essentially, I did some basic encounters and figured out, and when I was trying to do the math, I just figured out the numbers, and it would be a couple levels if you don't divide it, or it was just under 1 level for the first session if you did. So I'm like, you're supposed to divide it. Just doing the math, figured that out. And then they go like building random encounter tables Essentially, they have like different creating random encounter tables is here, and then they have like an example for a forest, which shows that while in previous editions it was usually you'd roll a dice and it was what monster pops up, but they give examples here that some are monsters, yeah, and that's just all they are. Others are plot points or friendly creatures, or like a magical plant with 2d4 glowing berries with effects. They're not all just you have a fight, you encounter something. So that just made that a more fun table to use. Chapter 4 is creating NPCs. They have small quick roll tables for whatever appearance, abilities, talents. They have whatever ideals, bonds, and flaws, much like you would for a player character. So you could of course pull the tables from a background in the player's handbook, or you have more generalized ones here. They go over whatever NPC party members, villains, what method the villain uses for their villainy. And these are called villainous class options, but it mentions, and of course, these are also other class options for the cleric and paladin for the player's handbook. The death domain for the cleric, or the oathbreaker oath for the paladin. So those are some options there, which are also good to use for villains as well as players. And Oathbreaker probably not in a good campaign. Death Domain really could even still be used in a good character campaign. Admittedly, in the game that I'm running currently, I have a good deity who has death on their domains. There's life and death. It's not necessarily evil, it's part of life. Carrying on though. Chapter 5 is adventure environments. Like where a dungeon might be located, who made it, what's its history, how to map out a dungeon, an example. Of course there are many ways to do it, but it's at least giving you an idea of how you can map it out for people that just haven't done it. They give some things to consider, such as, you know, concealed doors, darkness and light, air quality, sounds, things that you can mention in a dungeon to help make it come alive. And then dungeon hazards. Brown mold, green slime, webs, yellow mold, and they give, you know, of course, what those do. So that's of course fun. Then we go into the wilderness, different features for different locations, weather, some other considerations to describe things, the weather outside, high altitude, and then some hazards for the wilderness, such as desecrated ground, frigid water, quicksand, slippery ice, thin ice, etc. So there's, you know, more hazards to be out there. So again, fun. Make things come alive, I suppose. We get, you know, rules for foraging, for different settlements, building settlements, tavern name generator, and one of the ones, if you roll 5 twice in a row, you get the prancing pony, or, which actually, of course, for Lord of the Rings, or 15 twice in a row, the Lonely Mountain. Just get it? Anyways, so, yeah. Fun times, fun times. But yeah, essentially building a settlement, naming things, figuring out what types of buildings there are, etc. What the shop sells. Some urban encounters. Random list. So, still. Great fun, great fun. We get underwater stuff, and the sea, and then we get the, I think I mentioned in the Player's Handbook Flipthrough review that there was more information on those ships in this book, and this is where it is on the page that has this airship here, because they also add an airship to the list that wasn't there. But they give, you know, not only the costs, they give, you know, the speed, the crew, passengers, cargo, AC, HP, and the damage threshold. So they really, you know, there's where the rest of the information and how to use it is for sailing. Then of course we get 2 traps, we get the making the trap, and then we get a few example traps. It seems much like many less example traps as previous editions, but they're also easily adjustable based on how deadly or not you want them to be. These can be adjusted to be multiple traps, but yeah. Oh, and chapter 6 is Between Adventures, and I love this chapter. It goes over, well, various things, but, you know, it goes over, you know, campaign tracking, but then reoccurring expenses. It goes over what your maintenance costs for some things would be, businesses, garrisons, you know, if you have a shop or a castle, and then it goes into downtime activities. We had a few of these in the Player's Handbook, but here's where they really come into their own, with, you know, because there's more of them here. Things that you can oversee, do, etc. with your downtime between adventures. Building a stronghold, whether it's an outpost or whether it's a, let's see, whatever, small castle or a large castle. Essentially the considerations and rules for building those. Carousing, going out in the town, drink and ladies, and the different effects, possibly bad, possibly good, from your time spent doing so. If you're able, crafting magic items, if the Dungeon Master allows it, of course. Which is, really all of these fall into that list. And that is why they're in here and not there. Is some of these just are things that don't fit the campaign and or the world, and the Dungeon Master will say no, and that's fine. Gaining renown, with the rules that I mentioned earlier for organizations, so that would be within that. Performing sacred rites for like a religion, running a business, selling magic items, because magic items aren't easy to sell. It's hard to find someone with the money to pay it. So it would be finding a buyer for a magic item, and we have rules for that and the amount of time that takes. You can go around sowing rumors about people to affect their reputation. Optional rule that if you have to train to gain your level, so let's say you get the experience, you have to actually spend the time training in order to actually gain your level. And then it gives the Dungeon Master guides for creating new downtime activities as well. Alright, this is in my notes actually, if something I wanted to point out. I love that piece of art. It's like a burning city and a wizard on a flying carpet. Awesome magic item. Fighting a dragon. They're mostly in silhouette. It's just a beautiful piece of art. As many of them in here are, but that's just one. That's the one I wanted to take the moment to just step aside and point out. Anyways, Chapter 7 is Treasure. Chapter 7 is a very large chapter. That is, this section of the book is all treasure. And it begins with random treasure tables. Or rather, no, here's random treasure tables. It begins with not magical treasure. These are ones that I've already used once, just in my campaign, just to give a slight variation. Instead of giving the guy a bunch of coins, I gave him a couple of gemstones that they looted off of some guy. But generally it goes, you know, gemstones of different values and art objects of different values. So they're alternates to money. So instead of handing the player money, here is stuff that you could sell that maintain their full value. It's that kind of stuff. Here is the chart if you're looking for ranges of the cost of magic items. Here's, you know, what the value range would be if you're in a world where buying and selling is common. Then we go into treasure tables, treasure hoards, And just sort of, you know, for generating what treasure will be found. We get some variant rules for mixing potions or scroll mishaps, or for wands that don't recharge, because wands in here do recharge. I think probably at dawn, because most things recharge at dawn. We get some information that you can give to magic items, including minor property. What minor property does it have? Giving a minor property in addition to what the item already does. For example, harmonious. Attuning to this item takes only 1 minute. Easier to attune to, or whatever language. The bearer can speak and understand a language of the Dungeon Master's choice while the item is in the bearer's possession. Just, it has an additional thing that it does. Or what quirk does it have? I like this one, muttering. The item grumbles and mutters. A creature who listens carefully to the item might learn something useful. But just the fact that... So quirks or extra properties that you can give to the magic items in addition to what they do. Nothing really big in effect, but just to add flavor to it. So there's some fun tables there. And then we actually get the random, you know, once you've determined what table to roll on, here's where you determine what magic items someone would get with these random tables here. Of course, going up in power as they go further back. And then we start with our magic items A to Z. Let's see. First one I wanted to point out was over here. Bag of Tricks. It's a little bag of different materials that you would pull out, essentially a fluffy ball, throw it to the ground, and it would become an animal, permanently, that starts out friendly to you. Yay, fun! Going over to this next page, the Belt of Dwarven Kind, which is that, which you have to attune to. So when you get it, you have to spend the time attuning the item to yourself. You can, I think, have 3 items attuned to you at a time. And it gives you some benefits. Your con increases by 2, still only up to 20. You have advantage on persuasion checks made to interact with dwarves. Also, while attuned to the belt, you have a 50% chance each day at dawn of growing a full beard if you're capable of growing one, or a visibly thicker beard if you already have one. You get a beard. And if you aren't a dwarf, you also get a few features of the dwarf races, of the few dwarf racial features. So you also, you know, reading right, Dwarven, dark vision, and advantage on saving throws against poison. So you're also a little bit more dwarfy. So that's a fun item. I won't be doing one every page, but there's a few right here at the beginning. Yeah, one of the things, they have Boots of Elvenkind, and it kind of made me upset. I was reading through and I was like, why don't they let you walk on snow? Because, you know, that would be fun. They let you, whatever, sneak. Boots of the Winterlands do, though. Because you have resistance to cold damage, you ignore difficult terrain created by ice or snow. That would be the walking on snow part, of course. And you can tolerate temperatures as low as -50 degrees Fahrenheit without any additional protection. And if you have heavy clothes, you can go up to -100 degrees Fahrenheit. So just wearing your boots. That's all I need to stay warm. But yeah, they go through, as you see. The pages have the magic items and art. So much art. Beautiful art. A deck of many things with art. More art. You getting the picture? Plenty of art. Very pretty. One of the things, they have manuals. Bodily health, gainful, exercise, and I think it's quickness of action. Like, for example, Manual of Bodily Health. It's a wondrous item that's very rare. This book contains health and diet tips. I read that, and that's just funny for a magic item. Gives you some diet tips. Anyways, its words are charged with magic. If you spend 48 hours over the period of 6 days or fewer studying the book's contents and practicing its guidelines, your Constitution score increases by 2, as does your maximum for that score. The manual then loses all its magic, but regains it in a century. So once every 100 years, someone can use, one of those books. The same, that's Con. There's one for Strength and Dex. But I thought that was just an interesting recharge time, fun item that they have there. It's a portable hole. I'm just filling it with treasure. The robe of useful items. It's a robe with patches on it that can be torn off and turned into the item that they are. Hemp rope, steel mirror, bullseye lantern, dagger, as well as other items such as bags of money, or a riding horse with saddlebags, or a couple of dogs, or portable ram, etc. The Dungeon Master chooses what the other patches are. But it's just... in the D20 Modern game, there was the trench coat of useful items, and it was one of my favorite to give out. And so this, likewise, I'm sure will end up being one that I will end up giving out at some point. Because it's a fun item to see what the players do with it. You see the art theme does continue. What's I going to do? We get staves. Staff of Healing. Like a staff would have 10 charges. A lot of items do have charges. When holding it, you can use an action to expend one or more of its charges to cast one of the following spells, using your spell save DC and spellcasting ability modifier. Cure Wounds is 1 charge. Per spell level up to 4th, Lesser Restoration for 2 charges, and Mass Cure Wounds for 5. It regains 1d6 plus 4 expended charges daily at dawn. If you use the last charge, roll a d20. On a 1, the staff vanishes in a flash of light, lost forever. So as long as you don't use the last charge, it will just keep regaining them. And then they have the tomes here for like they had the manuals before, tomes for intelligence, charisma, and wisdom that work pretty much the same way. More items, more art. They go over sentient magic items and some examples of those. Artifacts, which have additional random properties. But they have some of those. Oh, okay. I went one page too far. And then they have other rewards, and these are some of the ones that I really love. Supernatural gifts. Whether they're blessings or charms, are things that are given like from deities or just legendary creatures as gifts. Like the Blessing of Health is your Constitution score increases by 2 up to a maximum of 22. That's just cool. Or whatever, yeah. So they have, benefits that they would give a blessing. Or a charm, it would be something that's like a one-time use sort of thing, like Charm of Dark Vision. This charm allows you to cast the Dark Vision spell as an action. No components required. Once used 3 times, the charm goes away. So they're limited use, but again, they're just, you get to do something. Then we have Marks of Prestige, which are something you are given that isn't really magical, but it's important. Letter of Recommendation. If you're trying to get in somewhere, perhaps the king writes you a let this person in. Medals. Parcels of land. You're just given land to use as you please. Special favors. Special rights. Perhaps the right to carry, to bear arms in various places that usually people have to remove their weapons for. that kind of thing. Just rights to do things. Given a stronghold, given titles, political stuff, or given training to do something. So those are some really cool things that are story-based rewards. And then we have epic boons. And those are essentially, after you've reached 20th level, for every 30,000 experience, you get one of these. And they're essentially what is epic level in 5th edition. They're not gaining more classes, they're getting an ability. Which works well. And I'm glad that they contained it in the base game. So at the very least, even if later on they give other ways to do epic level, you have a way to do epic level that is fun and easy to essentially, you no longer gain full classes, but you get some bonus abilities as you go up. Like getting an extra 9th level spell slot. Or stopping aging. Immortality. Stop aging. Immune to any effect that would age you. Can't die of old age. Etc. You know, some are flavor, some are mechanical. But yeah, so epic boons. And then we get to part 3, which is Master of Rules. Which goes over first running the game, which is just goes over first, you know, tabletop, actual practical stuff for trying to run a game. Ways to reference ability scores, how things work, DCs, saving throws, attack rolls, inspiration, exploration, role-playing, social interaction, quick, you know, reference for objects, what their AC would be, if it's fragile or not, how many hit points it would have, quickly being able to do objects, some combat guides, as well as hex and square, mat, miniature-based rules with optional rules for flanking, diagonals, and facing, rules for chases, and complications within them, siege equipment, ballistas, rams, suspended cauldrons, cannons, siege tower, trebuchets. That's great fun. Gotta love siege equipment. Then diseases, poisons with some options, and madness are all in here, as well as an idea for advancing without experience. All of that is just stuff for running the game and giving you ideas for doing so. Then we get to Chapter 9, which is the Dungeon Master's Workshop. And these are changing the rules, or adding things, or whatever. It's one of the things that I was looking forward to most. Admittedly, a lot of it I didn't need, or I've sort of thumbnailed for I'll do this later. But it is fun, and it's good that they have this. Proficiency is a straight bonus in the game. In the playtest, there was a point where it was going to be a dice. They give that as an optional rule here. They give the idea of no skills, just using the stats. They give new ability scores, honor and sanity, as examples, and the idea that you can add ability scores to the game. Click hero points. Rules for fear and horror, adding that to the game. Healing. This is actually one of the ones that I did end up using. They give rules for healing surges, slow natural healing, requiring healing kits, as well as different rest variants. I think this is the one that I ended up using, where it essentially, I require them to use their healing surges when they take a long rest as well. So essentially they don't automatically refill on their health every day. It's just, you know, versions for healing being a little more difficult. They give firearms and explosives. both in sort of the Renaissance sort of period, as well as, which include, of course, prices, but they also give them for modern and futuristic items. So if you mix a little sci-fi with your fantasy, they have the stats, though those are considered priceless because they're out of there. And I do love that they have a piece of art for that jetpack riding, laser shooting fantasy character. Combat options, different ways to do initiative, action options like climbing onto a bigger creature, disarm, marking a creature as, you know, they're ongoing, overrun, shove aside, tumble. Some things that I actually had my players ask, hey, what are the rules for that? And, well, that's where those are. If they, you know, to help if your players want to do something where you can have an idea for how to do it. Optional rules for lingering injuries, massive damage, morale. So there's some stuff for that. And then we get to what starts the creating your own stuff sort of area. Starting with creating a monster. This is one of the sections I haven't read through as thoroughly as I will. But generally it is your how to build your own monsters, from modifying ones that are currently there to two different methods for creating them from scratch. The quick monsters and the detailed ones. So depending on, you know, what you're looking to create and how much you're going to use it. It gives sort of creating the monster, figuring out what challenge rating it would be, and like these tables are for how they affect the challenge rating, and where you can find an example of each of the different abilities that monsters have, like what's one of the monsters that you can go read what it does, and how it affects the challenge rating. It looks pretty detailed. For example, like, an ability wouldn't just say plus whatever to challenge rating. It would increase the effective, let's say, armor class. And then, so when calculating the challenge rating, you pretend its armor class is one higher than it actually does if it has this ability. Which I think is a pretty thorough way. That way that abilities that make it harder for them to be hit, even though it's not directly increasing the armor class, calculate it as if it does. And abilities that are more roleplay based don't affect the challenge rating at all, because that's not what that represents. So I like that. Here is the NPC features for the, at the end of the monster manual it had NPCs, magician, druid, etc. And this is how you make them other races. Not just whatever dwarf, elf, halfling, but also making zombies or skeletons or lizard folk, merfolk versions of them. And what essentially what abilities, ability modifiers and features that you give them to make them those races. Guidelines for creating a spell, for creating a magic item. And the thing about creating things here is it's not a direct formula for how powerful it is based on what it does. There's no 1-to-1 ratio. It is sort of a feel for how powerful it actually plays. Creating a race or sub-race, they give examples for both as they're showing guidelines for how to do it, because it's not, as I said, just a straight, this is how this works. But that also means that there's a couple extra races for the game back here. The sub-race for Elf, Eladrin, which was from 4th edition, and then the Aasimar race to pair up with the Tiefling as the good alternative, celestial alternative, I suppose. And then they have guidelines for modifying a class, things like, or creating a new class options to create a full new class. But yeah. And then they also have options for spell points as a variant to the spell levels. Creating a background, they go over that here. And then and that's the end of the chapters. We get to the appendices. So I do love some of the creation stuff in here. Great fun. The appendices start with random dungeon, which goes over the how to build it based on what is the shape and size of rooms, to, you know, actually mapping it out with stairs, etc. and then how to connect areas. And then it goes, what type of dungeon is it? Is it a lair, or a maze, or a mine, or a death trap? And so what would the features, what would the rooms be? Down to just general dungeon chambers. And then what state it is in. Is it decayed, or is it well kept? What does it contain? Does it contain monsters? Or does it obstacles or traps? Down to what sounds or odors are in the dungeon, to general furnishings, to religious articles and magical furnishings, utensils and personal items, the contents of containers, books, scrolls, and tomes, just lists and roll tables for random stuff. This one in particular I've used already just for a group of people out in the woods that they came across and slaughtered. But it's just great roll tables for just stuff near the end of here, which I find so useful. So it's back in the appendices for dungeons, but some of this stuff is not just for dungeons. Then the second is B, monster lists. We get monsters divided into where they would be located by challenge rating. So if you're in a forest area, you'd have this to reference, etc. for various locations. And then they have the list of monsters by challenge rating, to just break it up by, if you're looking for a certain challenge rating monster, here's the list to choose from. Something that people were quite upset when it wasn't in the Dungeon Master's Guide. Not me in particular, but I certainly remember people being upset about that. I'm much more likely to choose a monster regardless of its challenge rating and hope that they can fight it than try and figure out what challenge rating monsters are available. Appendice C is maps. Some of which would be useful to just use as is. Others are more of an example of here's how to make a really cool looking map. They have just, you know, a windmill, whatever. That's cool, a building. A couple of dungeon maps. Some area maps. Here's sort of a dungeon that goes to a chasm. A ship, that one can certainly be useful. Cave system. Yeah. So there's just a few maps. Useful to have, and more useful as just examples of how to map something out. They give inspiration and then the index. With a beautiful winterscape there at the end. So that is the 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons Dungeon Master's Guide. Beautifully illustrated. Lots of information. Not all of it's the best organized. Some things are in weird places, and some things there's no way to organize it best. But it contains a lot of stuff. Useful tool. Check it out. I'll link where you can find it online, or you can find it at your local gaming store. So check it out and have a great day. Bye.